To discuss the future of fuel standards, please welcome Spencer Reeder, Director of Government Affairs at Audi of America, here with Atlantic staff writer Robinson Meyer.
It's so nice. We started the day with talking about utilities, a place where carbon emissions are already falling, and we get to talk to transportation, the next zone. I should also ask, we were just discussing this backstage, you work for Audi. They let you drive an Audi, right?
Indeed, yeah. They let me, yeah.
They let you. Do you enjoy, tell us briefly, electric?
Absolutely, yeah, the Audi e-tron, our first all-electric vehicle. And as we were talking backstage, I'm very much into the outdoors. I live in California, I'm a skier. Audi came out, as some of you may know, with their first all-electric vehicle. It's a fully capable Audi SUV, much in the sort of spirit of the Q5 or Q7. It sort of sits in between those two models. It's got a roof rack, an operable sky.
That's great.
This is all of that stuff. So
perfect.
Yep.
Great. Audi.
You asked the question.
No. I did. No. This is me. Knowing I'm playing the Dr. Frankenstein role here. So this past summer, let's first talk about fuel efficiency and economy, and then we'll go back to electrification. And this past summer or this past year, the Trump administration said it would roll back the fuel economy standards. In fact, it would freeze them at 2020 levels for 5 years. What's the environmental impact of a change like that, if we were to freeze the CAFE and GHG standards?
Well, let me answer your question in a slightly different way. And you mentioned the Paris Accord. That was part of a number of panels. Audi, which is part of the Volkswagen Group, has been very explicit about our support for the Paris Agreement on climate change. We are committed to year-over-year reductions in CO2 emissions from our vehicle fleets, and that really then necessitates a continuing improvement in fleet fuel economy. So for us, it's really not a question of any type of regulatory framework. We're doing this with our fleet. So, we support that for the industry, regardless of what happens in terms of the rollback or not. Mm-hmm. Audi and Volkswagen Group more generally are going to continue to improve our fuel economy throughout the fleet. And we, listen, it's unquestionable that you don't hit the transportation carbon targets without doing that.
Though it's Audi is operating in a slightly different segment, but it's generally to the economic detriment of companies that kind of go it alone with fuel economy reductions if the whole industry isn't following them. Is that right? In other words, it does add to the cost of a car. It works out for consumers. Consumers save money over time if there's fuel economy adjustments, but it does increase the sticker price of the car to have fuel economy improving technology on there. Is it bad for some of the companies to kind of go it alone on these emissions, or to have to go it alone on these improvemements?
We don't necessarily think in the context of the U.S. or even North America. We're a global company. Volkswagen arguably is the largest auto manufacturer on the planet. So we've got Europe in mind. We've got what's happening in China in mind. We're making a $34 billion investment in electrification alone. And so for us, there is no turning back. We're essentially betting the farm on this transformation that's occurring. The question for us, certainly within the U.S. context, which I focus on, is how quickly is that transformation going to occur? What's the role of other potential alternative fuels? So there are some interesting questions. However, I would just say that, this is a global commitment we're making from the very top, and we've been very unambiguous about that.
Yes, and so I just want to hit two more things before we go. The first is that Audi is working with California to on a local emissions project on an effort to keep emission standards low in that state. Can you tell us anything about that?
Well, we've committed. Actually, the interesting thing here, yes, we have been collaborating with California on making sure that we are consistent with their climate objectives, but it's a national program for us. What we do in California is what we do across the country. The vehicle fuel efficiency standards that we agree to with California will be the standard we use for all 50 states. our electric vehicles are not just being sold in California or in the ZEV compliant states. We're selling that vehicle in every state. All 300 plus of our dealerships are prepared to sell all of our EVs. So,
But there are other automakers who are either fighting those standards or claiming that there are kind of multiple different emission standards across the country due to California, right? Are they right? Is that the right thing to be doing?
Yes, I mean, in theory, you could make the argument that there are these different state, it's the California plus the ZEV states that have that standard, and that if the federal government diverges, then you do have this sort of bifurcation in the regulatory framework that creates more work for everybody. I mean, it's not the ideal solution. We've been clear, and I think the industry associations, have been consistent in saying that the better solution is like what we achieved with the Obama administration, which is a unified program that harmonizes California's regulatory aims with that of the federal government, and that's better and easier and cheaper for everybody.
The Trump administration, due to Audi's work with California, has now opened or has said they're looking into antitrust claims against the 4 companies, one including the Volkswagen Group and Audi, that worked with California to produce these lower standards. Is that right?
That's correct. That's about all I can comment on.
Yeah, do you want to say anything else?
No. I think the Department of Justice is down here somewhere. So.
They can't hear it. Do you think that's a good state of affairs for, say, American decarbonization in the transportation sector?
I'll take that as a rhetorical question.
Could I ask one last question, which is, when you look at the documents that have come out for the national policy for this freeze at 2020, do you have a sense that the regulators and the regulating agencies understand how cars work?
Actually, it's arguable whether or not the cars or the regulatory framework are more complex in this case. If you dig into the CAFE standards and how they've been formulated, it is a fairly complex regulatory framework. So yeah, I think there's good intentions throughout the federal agencies working on this, and there's a long history of fuel economy work at EPA and at the US DOT. So I think there's a lot of well-intentioned folks that are trying to sort of thread the needle here. I think for us, again, a couple statistics. We're going to build within the Volkswagen Group 70 models by the time the Olympics come back to LA. I'm in California, 2028. We'll have 70 plug-in models representing a volume of 22 million vehicles over this time period. And so, the regulatory stuff is really important. I get paid to sort of dig into this, but from the company strategy standpoint, this is where we're heading. Mm-hmm. The Volkswagen Group is going electric. And
not on a compliance car basis. This is not
a compliance issue for us. This is more of an existential decision that has been made at the very top. Dr. Deese, who heads the Volkswagen Group, has made a lot of public statements recently about our commitment to addressing climate change, about the necessity for doing this. We think it's a better experience for our consumers.
Yeah.
This is where things are heading. If you get the chance to drive in the Audi e-tron, you'll see what I mean. They're great vehicles. From a performance standpoint, from an experiential standpoint, it allows us to move towards automation as well. So the whole sort of industry is going to go this way. We want to be a leader. That's why we're doing this.
It is this crazy thing because all the electric vehicles basically, or many of them, have this insane 0 to 60 statistic because electric motors are so good at torque. Right. And it has been very fortuitous for the transition thus far that this one statistic that car people kind of tend to focus on and like, which is 0 to 60, also lines up really well with the technical capacity of electric motors. Right. Where are we on electrification? So obviously Audi's doing a lot. In fact, it laid off 20,000 workers in Germany in the past week. As part of that transition to electrification, I'm going to talk about that in a second.
Well, just to clarify, Audi's number is 9,000.
Audi's number is 9,000. Yeah. Volkswagen Group laid out.
Audi's number is 9,000.
Audi's number is 9,000.
Yeah.
Where are we on electrification? Are we talking about ARPANET in 1981? Mm-hmm. Or are we talking about natural gas and it's 2009 and this thing is about to wash over us and completely change the grid? just due to market forces?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think nationally we're still hovering around maybe closer to 2% adoption of EVs. So it's not a foregone conclusion that we get there quickly enough to address some of the climate crisis issues that we've been talking about today. So I think there's an ecosystem around the vehicle that has to also accelerate commensurate with our objectives. And I think there's a lot of work that still needs to be done on the infrastructure side. Also on consumer awareness. There was and I'll be really quick, UC Davis ran a survey in California, the leading state for EV adoption, where they asked the public, they did I can't remember what the sample size was, how many of you can name an EV? 70% of the people couldn't name one. And of the 30%, plus or minus, and of the 30% or so that could, about 40% of them got it wrong. So even in California,
The
there's
Prius
this...
is not an EV.
Right. Even in California, there's this great need for additional consumer awareness. Audi's been running a pretty robust marketing campaign, but I think we still have a long ways to go in terms of awareness and education. And then once you get there, you still have the infrastructure side.
And on the infrastructure side, is this going to require public investment at this point, or will charging...
I mean, Volkswagen Group's making a $2 billion investment, somewhat, wasn't voluntary.
Yeah, I was going to say, the Volkswagen Group here has done, I would say, more to electrify the fleet in this country than just about other entities.
But Tesla's another example of a company that did make that private investment. I think it's going to be a public-private partnership. There'll be investments from the utility sector, from other resources. I think it's going to be an all hands on deck.
Do you see the utilities keep catching up here? Like, are utilities kind of eager to capture all the energy market share they're about to get coming off fossil and going to the grid?
For those of you that follow the utility sector, I would say the last 6 to 8 months have been unbelievable in terms of the sort of wildfire spread. No pun intended, we're having wildfires in California. But the spread of sort of awareness and activity in this space in terms of EV charging in the energy space, it's the last 8 months have been really unbelievable. So I think you see many, many more utilities and their commissions now much more engaged.
Does Audi talk to utilities like, hey, FYI, 70 plug-in models, like...
We do, yeah, we do. We helped launch the Alliance for Transportation Electrification, which is primarily a utility-led group, but we are one of the OEMs that are part of that group, really to help engage in the conversation with utilities themselves, their commissions, the stakeholders around the energy space, because we think that this convergence of transportation and energy is really key, and we think it has to be done well to succeed.
No, there are other alternate fuels here. People talk about hydrogen. Some of the still have significant regulatory support from California. There was a time where we would have talked about this race between electrification and hydrogen in terms of decarbonized vehicles. Do you think we're still in that race, or do you think electrification at this point has won?
Yeah, this is a topic that people approach with a lot of passion and emotions. I have to be careful. There's hydrogen fans. I will admit, Audi has a hydrogen fuel cell technology we've been developing as the lead sort of R&D arm within the Volkswagen Group, and we have that. And in Europe, the context is actually different. In California, for light-duty vehicles, it appears that electrification is sort of the winning horse. In the medium and heavy-duty, there's still an open debate. And who knows? I mean, 5 years from now, maybe we'd have a different view, around the hydrogen fuel cell in the light-duty space. I think there's still a competition, but clearly, if you look at just the raw data in terms of the number of EV charging stations versus the number of hydrogen refueling stations, there's a diverging trend.
We're going to go to questions in a minute, so open Slido and get your questions ready. Do you see consumers starting to account for electrification? Do you see people, especially in the segment, the kind of upmarket segment that Audi works in, do you see consumers beginning to delay gas vehicle purchases? Do you see any sense that people know a transition's coming?
Yeah, again, it's mixed. I mean, if only 15% of the market is even aware, then it's hard to argue that the bulk of consumers are making a conscious choice for EVs. Although you have certain markets like the Bay Area, Los Angeles, Portland, Seattle, parts of Colorado now, even parts of Texas, Austin, where you have a little bit more fluency in the consumer base, and they're making those choices for environmental reasons, but also just coolness factor, and I think there's this phrase, butts and seats, ride and drives are really key. When someone experiences the vehicle, then it sort of transforms the way that they think about that car, the way they talk about it to their friends and network. And that sort of word of mouth networking effect we think is really important on the marketing side. We ran a Super Bowl ad around our electric vehicle. We ran ads during the Emmys, a lot of the major sporting events. So we're doing our side on the marketing side, but we think it's a combination of things that's going to generate that consumer demand.
You're a climate scientist by training. How much, in terms of getting the transportation sector to zero emissions, how much are EVs going to be able to do that? I mean, are we not going to need more and better public transit options, more and better mass transit options, whether that's through public investment or not? If everyone had an electric car, I suppose carbon emissions from gasoline would be quite down. But actually, for a number of reasons, some air pollutants would be up, and traffic would be a nightmare everywhere. So how much of this can actually happen through electrification of vehicles?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I'm a bike commuter. I work for a car company. I ride my bike to work. I love public transportation. I moved to California from Seattle.
Seattle's
Seattle's one of the few cities that actually saw an increase in transit ridership. But if you look at transit statistics across the country, it's been down. So I don't think, I don't think we can be too sanguine about transit being the solution. Even though I'm a willing public transit participant. The attachment to the single occupant vehicle is going to be here for a while at least. So I think all of those have to be electrified. For everything that California's done, transportation emissions continue to go up, shockingly.
Do you think car companies have a role in saying anything about public transit and promoting it at all?
Listen, I was at a Smart Cities conference and I talked about walkable communities. I mean, I'm not sure everyone in my company is happy about that, but we are looking at
German
mobility.
cities are quite walkable.
We're looking at mobility sort of broadly. We know that there's going to be a lot of vehicles sold for the foreseeable future, and so Audi wants to make sure we offer the most compelling selection of electric vehicles. Because listen, I don't think we get to the climate goals without electrifying the light duty vehicle. It's absolutely critical.
What is your message for other car companies? Audience question. GM, Fiat Chrysler, Toyota that have sided with the Trump administration and supported the rollback of CAFE standards.
It's not my place to talk to those folks. They can see what we're doing. So.
Toyota doesn't even have an electric vehicle right now, I believe.
I'll let others comment on the other OEMs.
I asked my last question. Let's talk about the mix in Europe for a bit. I mean, do you think electrification of vehicles? Well, let me actually ask this: what can the U.S. Audi's a German company. What can the U.S. learn from how Europe has tackled decarbonization and decarbonizing transportation so far?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, for those of you that are following this topic at all, you know that Norway has been sort of held up as the great example. I mean, it's not really an analog because they have this incredible tax on vehicles that they can basically then create. It's an economic decision for people in Norway. It's cheaper to buy a Tesla than it is to buy a Volkswagen Golf diesel because of the way that their tax structure is. But it is the ecosystem. Like, how are you incentivizing people, giving them access to carpool lanes, which is a big advantage in California. There's these other things, non-financial incentives that governments can weigh in on to create that kind of draw, to build out the demand. I mean, it is really the demand side of the equation that we really have to continue to look at. Like, how do you build demand for these vehicles?
Like consumer demand. How do you transfer consumer demand? Volkswagen Group was caught faking emissions tests for their cars, as you are aware. Why should consumers believe the company is committed to combating climate change now?
Yeah, I don't think people need to believe. I think they just need to watch us and make sure that they, I think we need the world to continue to watch us closely and by our actions. So don't believe it, convince yourself through our actions. Look at the vehicles that are going to be in the market. Look at our sales. Look at our marketing strategy. Is there any other OEM marketing electric vehicles to the scale that Audi is?
Does that continue down to the dealer level? Because historically dealers have been less willing to sell EVs.
Yeah,
and
if
other
you
green
know
cars.
anything about franchise law, it's a state-by-state framework, and we are limited in our ability to control dealerships. We can't control them, in fact, but we can create the right incentive structures. All of our dealers are selling. Like I said, this is a 50-state strategy for Audi. This isn't just selling into those markets where we think we can sell them. All of our dealerships have been primed for the EV revolution. But listen, the whole, the dealership experience that people, I think, rightly sort of criticize in terms of this new technology, that's going to evolve, and we're doing as much as we can as an auto manufacturer to get our dealers ready for this transition.
Great. Well, hey, thank you so much.
Yeah.
And thank you all for being here today.